what we'll be talking about today is creating merit, and how it is that a person comes to need to create merit, and what are the circumstances surrounding the practice of creating merit. And in order to do that, we would have to talk about what a lack of merit produces. Not necessarily a happy part of the discussion, but a necessary one for sure. And of course the children in their class were learning something about how to create auspicious circumstances by which to reap the fruit of auspicious result. So the backbone, or the main theme of the discussion, is very similar, but I think that we can approach it in a more profound way, perhaps, than the children can. Excuse me. To begin with, we should think about when a practitioner first enters onto the path. And of course that means across the board, in any way that a practitioner enters onto the path. Practitioners enter onto the path in very different ways. I've seen so far in my involvement with the Dharma and with teaching students, I've seen many different varieties on that theme. I have seen people walk into the temple and be greatly moved by the exotic flavor of the ritual objects and surroundings and things like that, and be greatly moved somehow by a teaching that they hear, or be very enthusiastic about making a student-teacher relationship with me, and will immediately come into it and consider that this is their spiritual home, and feel very, very good about it, very certain. I even have one student that bought a one-way ticket to this place, never having met me, and hasn't left since. I have not been able to get rid of him, try as I might. I mean, I've given it my best shot, but what to do? I've seen other circumstances in which students have walked through the door, and the opposite has happened. They've walked through the door to look at crystals in the crystal shop, or some innocuous, bland kind of afternoon activity. And from somewhere in another part of the house, I'll come running out and say, "You should practice Dharma." And they'll go, "Whoa." And then they never leave. So all these different things have happened. And then I've seen other people court the Dharma, court it in a very slow and steady way. And that has been, I find that a very appealing method. I feel that that is a very good method. When people take their time and examine the teaching and examine the teachings, teacher and examine the teachings, and examine the circumstance, the temple, and examine their own motivation, I find that very appealing. I like that method. Although I do have a flair for the other dramatic things that have happened. Love that. I've seen people come in, say they've been searching all their lives. This is the only thing that makes sense. They're players. Many, many different ways that people approach Dharma. And within these ways, excuse me, there are many different inner circumstances that are coming to fruition. For instance, excuse me. For instance, people will come to the temple and they will feel that, I've actually had students say this to me, they will feel as though they have a certain sense of spiritual direction within their minds, and everything they hear at the temple resonates right with them. And they feel as though it might have been said by them. They feel as though some teaching, for instance, that I might be giving, might have been said by them, that it somehow came from inside of them. And then other students feel as though they've come to the temple and they've learned something that seemed very simple, but somehow it put everything else in place. And there are other students that come to the temple, and really this does happen. They will come to me and they'll say, I'm actually very advanced in my spiritual practice. I've been practicing for many years. I would like to work with you, and if there's any way that I can help you in your work, please let me know. not understanding that in actuality there's a great arrogance in that, that one should never come to be a student in that posture that is not beneficial. Even if it's true that you are spiritually experienced, and even if it is true that in past lives or whatever you might have practiced before, still, until we reach supreme realization, it is better for all of us to remain totally in a humble and relaxed inner posture, that there's no sense in acting like that. And there are other students as well that come to the temple and feel that the energy is beautiful and blissful, and they have a sense of moving into a state of relaxation and bliss, and they feel that the only thing that they really have to do is to come to the temple and kind of sit down. They don't really have to listen to the teachings because that really taxes their minds. They would prefer to just engage in bliss. And of course, if you examine all of the different ways that one approaches the path, if you really listen to the different ways, each one of them has some benefit in that whatever it is, it hooks them into the Dharma. And if it hooks you into the Dharma, it can't be bad. If it really hooks you into a place where you can actually practice according to the Buddha's teachings, and specifically practice that method that leads to enlightenment, that hook is a blessing. There is a great blessing to that. If, on the other hand, you practice or you come to the temple, and rather I should say, if on the other hand you listen to some of the other ways that people come to the temple, and you hear that within each one of them there is not only a hook, but there is some delusion, that it's a mixed repertoire that they have going there, is a mixed blessing. You can really learn a lot in the sense that in each of the cases that I have stated, there are definite drawbacks. And those drawbacks have to do with the person's own mental condition, own inner ideas. Their motivation often is mixed. It's not entirely pure. Well, that doesn't mean that one should blame the student. If the student had perfect motivation and absolute clarity of mind, they wouldn't need to practice Dharma. They would be realized. So there would be no need for that. However, the student, however, has a certain level of delusion, and perhaps in some cases you might hear that some of the scenarios that I have described have inherent arrogance in them, that there is a kind of arrogance there. For instance, and here is an unexpected case, the sweet person, the person whose temperament is very sweet and light and kind of airy, would come into the temple and say, all I really have to do is just sit here and bliss out on the energy, and I really don't have to listen. I'll just feel the crystals and feel the energy of the teacher and feel the energy of the place, and I'll just really feel very good. Well, there's a terrible arrogance in that, if one can really hear it. Even though the person would seem very sweet and very kind and very unassuming, the arrogance in that is assuming that one has nothing to learn, that one should not apply oneself in a very disciplined and orderly way, that one should not exert any effort in order to accomplish the Dharma. And of course, this cannot be correct. Cannot be correct. If one could just sit and be blissful automatically, if one actually could accomplish bliss, if one understood what bliss was and could actually accomplish the blissful display of the primordial wisdom state, then one would not need to practice Dharma at all. One would be highly realized. So there are many different circumstances that bring people to the center, many different ideas, and each one of them has in it a blessing, which is a hook, and each one of them also has within them the flavor or taste of their own personal delusion. And in every case, you can expect that when a student first comes to the temple, the blessing will ripen and the delusion will ripen at the same time. And that really makes the first approach to the Buddha Dharma, the first entering onto the path, sometimes very difficult. It can be a real killer. I have had people come to me and say, wonderful stuff, this Dharma. My life's falling apart. Suddenly I realize I'm ignorant, I'm stupid, I don't know nothing about nothing. Everything I do is making me suffer. There's just not, why don't I just take myself out and shoot myself? Except now I found out that I can't do that because Bart, I was miserable. So I can't do anything. So what's the point? I've actually heard people come to me and say that this is how they're feeling about entering onto the path. At which point I say, good, because now you're finally really making some progress. And the first progress that is obvious in a student is when a student sort of wakes up as though from a dream and says, wow, I have a long way to go. Or, I really don't know anything about spiritual things. Or it sort of sets them back on their heels and they'll say, I better get busy now. I better really accomplish something. I'd better dig in. And at that point, there's a little bit of discomfort, and the discomfort comes from letting aside all of the little crutches that we use to make us feel strong and potent and spiritually adept. And we have to lay them aside. And that laying them aside is the first step, really, towards taking a real step. It's a very potent and very valuable time, but it doesn't feel good. There's no way that anyone can say that it feels good. And then other things will happen when a person first approaches the path. I've seen this happen too, that a person will come to the path and they will experience changes in their lives that they were not prepared to experience. For instance, changes in their relationships, changes in their job situation, changes in their health. Different things can happen. And the reason for that is hard to understand, but it actually is that when one engages in Dharma, Dharma is extremely potent. And as one begins to hear the teachings, just hear them alone, without even practicing, and then begin to actually practice, the amount of merit or good, auspicious activity, the accumulation of good, auspicious activity that one must have accumulated in previous incarnations, in previous lifetimes, in order to come to the point where you can actually practice in order to achieve enlightenment, is stupendous. It takes an enormous amount of virtue within the mind stream in order to have one's feet firmly set on the path. It takes a tremendous amount of merit, accumulated merit in past lives, and even prayers directed towards that specific. You know that if you are listening to Dharma teachings, if you are practicing Dharma, that in the past you must have made many, many prayers to be liberated from the cycle of death and rebirth. It has to be so. No one gets here accidentally. There are no accidents. So one thing that you know about yourself is that you have really accumulated a great deal of virtue and merit. But when you begin to notice that while you are setting your feet on the path and while you actually have the circumstances to practice the path, at the same time, unfortunate circumstances are also ripening, then you know that in the past you have also accumulated a great deal of non-virtue, and that the potency of Dharma tends to do something like stir into a big pot of soup that's been settling for all day long, and you stir it very deeply and you start to churn it up, and what looks like clear broth suddenly is filled with potatoes and carrots and turnips and all kinds of weird things. And they begin to float to the surface. Well, Dharma acts like that. Dharma actually churns up the mind stream and actually begins a kind of activity that ripens karma. Certainly it is said that to be in the presence of a qualified teacher, due to the realization of the teacher's mind, begins to ripen one's karma. Fortunately, if one forms a really stable relationship with that teacher and practices the continuation of that relationship with great devotion and fervent regard, then the relationship will serve to pacify much of the negative karma and to implement the ripening of the very pure karma, the very auspicious karma, so that one can practice, be firm, be stable, and whatever karma that ripens in an unfortunate way will ripen benignly, in a very benign way. So that relationship that between oneself and one's teacher is very, very important. It should be really kept in the highest regard, almost like a life jacket. You know, when you're in the middle of the ocean on a boat, you want to know what the life jacket is always. You want to know that it fits, you want to know how to put it on, you want to know where it is. It's only a fool that will sort of bypass that. And of course, we're in grave danger if we do. So the idea is then that when we enter onto the path, a mixed karma begins to ripen. And it happens to all of us. We should not at this moment take the opportunity to look around and say, oh, she must mean them. Or, wonder what's happened to that little booger over there. Or, try to compare oneself with others. Actually, the more you do that, the greater trouble you're in. Believe me, when I've been on this path long enough to know that you are asking for it if you do that. You are asking for trouble. And my recommendation to students is not to look at anyone else but oneself, and to assume that what the teacher says is correct. Absolutely, that when one enters onto the path, it will change one's mind. For one thing, if you did not wish to change on some level, if you did not wish to change, for instance, sufficiently that you might achieve realization or might yourselves become a great bodhisattva or a Buddha, you wouldn't be here. You must have some desire to wish to change. You do not any longer wish to be an ordinary sentient being that revolves endlessly on the cycle of birth and death. So you are desiring change. Then why should you be surprised when change comes? But students are invariably surprised when change comes. They are invariably surprised when their mind streams begin to purify and the soup is stirred up and they see the potatoes come to the surface. And there are potatoes, trust me, in that soup. And they feel very surprised when some of them are turnips. And they turn up, which they do. Sorry, I just had to do that. But at any rate, students are very, very much surprised when some of the most profound structures in their lives sometimes change. And the pattern is different with each student. It's different according to their karma. Some students will enter into the path as though they were greased. It seems very slick for them, very easy. They're in, and there are minimal changes, and they're not too uncomfortable. Changes occur over a long period of time, but in a very safe and comfortable way. Then I've seen other students who enter into the path like boom, like lightning striking. And suddenly the life is just like somebody took a deck of cards and threw it up in the air. What happened to me? And the student notices that suddenly they were prosperous and now they're broke. They were well and now they're sick. They were happy in a relationship and now they're ordained. What happened to them? Where were they? And then you look around and you're supposed to count your blessings now. So this kind of thing occurs. And it's an interesting set of circumstances. But one has to understand that within the mind stream, there are endless seeds that are in a latent or unripe green stage. And those seeds are mixed. That we have lived in cyclic existence since time out of mind. And since time out of mind, we have been creating these seeds of cause and effect relationships. In the past, we have been kind. In the past, we have been generous. In the past, we have been engaging in different kinds of practice. And in the past, we have been cruel. We have engaged in war. We have engaged in killing others. We have engaged in lying. And we've also engaged in making people happy. Even during the course of our lives, we can see that we've done some of these things. Try to imagine lifetime after lifetime in which we had no awareness of what makes happiness, or what makes cause and effect relation, or that there were cause and effect relationships. No understanding of that at all. And so due to that, we would simply engage in busy activity as we always do in a mindless way, actually. So of course we have all manner of different unripened seeds within our mind stream. And these seeds begin as we practice to come to the surface. They're constantly coming to the surface anyway, depending on, to some degree, the catalysts that we meet with in our lives. For instance, let us say that we have some unripened karmic seed within our mind stream about engaging in killing and engaging in caring for others. And let's say that we meet with a person with whom we have both kinds of karma, both killing and both caring. That we've done both in our past with both of these people, with this person. That person will catalyze the ripening of that seed, and we will more quickly see the ripening of the result. The external person actually acts as a catalyst. Now, we tend to view that as being their fault. We tend to view that as being their fault. But in truth, the seed is within our own mind stream, that nothing would occur if it were not within our mind stream, that absolutely there are cause and effect relationships that are waiting to be ripened, and the external person, or what seems to be the external person, is only a catalyst. When we meet Dharma, our minds are actually churned up greatly because very, very auspicious karma is being drawn on. The mind stream becomes, in a sense, more activated or more fluid or more dynamic. It acts as a catalyst. Furthermore, in our practice, we begin to have the intention of purifying our mind stream. And of course, that catalyzes the surfacing, if you will, of both pure intention and the reason for needing that pure intention, which is the impurities within our mind stream. There are many different things that occur due to the meeting of Dharma. But Dharma should be understood as cutting like a knife. It is meant to cut, to be potent enough to cut through aeons and aeons of cyclic existence. It is meant to cut through that. And to cut through that, it takes a very potent instrument. And a very potent instrument is going to do what it's going to do. That's why when we first enter onto the path of Dharma, we begin immediately to take the instruction of our teacher, and our teacher will immediately instruct us to engage in activities that create merit. Now, Vajrayana particularly is designed in such a way as to create merit to the nth degree. It isn't just like the kind of minimal, ordinary human merit that one would get if one were to, say, feed a hungry child, even though that's a very auspicious and very beneficial thing to do. Still in all, it is an ordinary human activity, and it produces ordinary human merit. To feed a child is to feed a child. When we engage in merit, we begin to do really amazing things like accumulating many repetitions of prostrations. We actually do prostration to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And we do refuge practice that way. And then we take the vow of the Bodhisattva, which is the vow to liberate sentient beings, to be compassionate towards sentient beings, to bring them to enlightenment from now until the time that all beings are supremely enlightened. We repeat that vow 100,000 times. It's a tremendously meritorious thing to do. And then we actually engage in a practice called mandala practice, in which we actually build a mandala with a ritual object that looks like a plate with rings. We actually build a mandala using rice or jewels or seeds or things that are either beneficial to eat or beautiful to have or valuable in some way. And in building the mandala, we consider that the mandala is actually like our own body, that we are offering our own body, speech, and mind in order to be of benefit to sentient beings. And we build that mandala 100,000 times and offer it to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in order that the stream of beings can be liberated. These are tremendously meritorious things to engage in. And the reason why we are told to engage in them is not because the teacher feels like passing out assignments, and not because we're into torture here and the thing to do is to be as miserable as possible, as quickly as possible. But we're actually engaging in these practices because they are extraordinarily meritorious and you need them. If you're going to practice Dharma in a straightforward way and to really reap the auspicious result of enlightenment, these meritorious practices are needed desperately. Furthermore, we are encouraged to make offerings on any of the altars. We are encouraged to make offerings to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. We are encouraged to form the auspicious relationship with and practice devotion to and make offerings to our teachers. We are encouraged to do things like circumambulate the stupa, walk around the stupa, making prayers for other sentient beings. We're always given some assignment that we should be doing, and we're encouraged to continue to involve ourselves in this kind of activity continuously. And it really isn't just to keep us off the streets, kind of like a Buddhist social thing, you know. It really is meant to help us to engage in meritorious activity. We will, without a doubt, meet with obstacles on the path, and we will not recognize them as obstacles. We will not understand them. The obstacles can come in many different ways. We can, for instance, meet with an obstacle in our practice, such as the inability to visualize. And we'll think, well, I can't do this practice. I can't visualize the deity. Can't visualize the Buddha. Can't visualize the mandala. How can I do this practice? Well, the reason why you cannot you can visualize, but the reason why you think you can't visualize under those conditions is because you don't have the merit ripening at the time to engage deeply in that practice. But everyone can visualize. Everyone can. When you get hungry and close your eyes and think about chocolate cake, tell me you can't visualize. You can visualize. You can smell it, you can taste it, and you can see it. And if you think that you're so tired and you just like your bones are aching and all you can think about is your bed, your nice comfortable bed with your quilt, tell me you can't visualize. You absolutely can visualize. Everyone can visualize. It's just whether or not they can engage in the practice deeply enough to really achieve the auspicious result. And that has to do with merit. Then other people will get into the path and they'll get into it full force and great guns and they'll burn hot and fast and suddenly they'll run out of steam. Just run out of steam. And they'll use an excuse. They'll say something like, oh, I'm like that. You know, I just sort of get into something hot and heavy and then poof, I'm gone. Or I do that all the time. I get real enthusiastic and then I run out of steam. Or, you know, that just I can't help that, so I'm just going to keep going. I'll just go on my way. Well, that's baloney, because you're not like that. Nobody's like that. What we are like is the primordial wisdom nature. We are like the Buddha. That's what we are like. But we are demonstrating the evidence of non-virtue. And the evidence of non-virtue ripens as our inability to continue on the path. What's needed there is more meritorious activity. And then, the same thing happens when we become sick. If we get on the path and suddenly we notice that we're sick and we don't feel good and it makes us not want to practice anymore and we kind of lose interest and we're just going through a bad time and different things happen in our lives. And we think, well, that's just the breaks. It must be, and this is the favorite one, it must be an indication that I should not practice Dharma. From who? First of all, from who? Do you think, is it very likely to you that the Buddha is going to walk up to you and say, look, I know I taught this path, and you know, it works for sentient beings, but you don't need it, you know? I mean, let's get real. You really don't need this. The likelihood that the Buddha is going to walk up to you and say that to you is minimal, very, very small. And so you should consider that it is far more likely that what is happening is that an obstacle or a delusion is arising within your path, and that, in fact, you are losing interest, and in fact, you are less stable on the path, but what needs to happen is you need to accumulate more virtue and merit so that you can remain more stable. And the things that are happening that make you feel uncomfortable are the ripening of some unfortunate karma. And the antidote to that is to create more meritorious circumstance, more meritorious events, more meritorious ripenings, more auspicious ripenings. And that is the antidote to these unfortunate ripenings. They will come to outweigh the ripening of negative karma, and therefore one's experience will be a happy and content and stable one. And so that's what will happen. It's difficult for us to understand this, but the message is clear, that we have to stand outside of our own experience and really get the big picture, because we tend to get so sucked in by our own personal experience that we have no view, we have no perspective. It's not like we can stand outside and look at ourselves the way we can look at others, and we're good at looking at others, and say, gee, aren't we messing up here? Or isn't that a stupid idea? Or how deluded can I possibly get? We don't have the capacity to do that just yet. But certainly we can look at others and say, he or she is not doing very well on the path, must not have very good karma. We can do that. We can say, oh, I can see that they're having a problem. They need to practice more. But we can hardly ever say that about ourselves. Hardly ever understand that about ourselves. So we have to develop the skill of standing outside of ourselves and looking that these things that come up, and they do come up, are an indication of our own non-virtue. They are an indication of the fabric or the material within our own mind streams. And the antidote has to be applied. The antidote is the accumulation of meritorious practice in all of the different ways that it can be practiced. Sometimes people will say, well, I've practiced Dharma real hard and now I'm not feeling good about it, and so I need to take a vacation from Dharma. Right. Of course you do. Actually, what's happening is an obstacle is arising in your path and you need to practice it away. That's what's happening. I even had one student come to me and say, what was it that he said? He said that he had a dream in which Amitabha, none other than Amitabha, Lord Buddha Amitabha, appeared to him in the dream state and said, Dharma is not for you. And he believed him. And I said, look, it's like this. I can't speak for Lord Buddha Amitabha, for sure. I wouldn't even think to do that. I mean, if I had a dream about him, I wouldn't even confess that. But I have to tell you that I don't think that Amitabha would come to you and say, don't practice my path. I don't think that Amitabha has the power to do that, in the sense that the path is inseparable from one's own Buddha nature. It is simply the revelation of the Buddha nature. None other than that. Lord Buddha Amitabha himself cannot take the path away from you because it is your nature. It is the revelation. It is the face of your nature. Even Guru Rinpoche cannot take Guru Rinpoche away from you. Amitabha cannot take Amitabha away from you because the Buddha cannot take the Buddha nature away from you. It simply isn't like that. It can't be done. And so, even in a case as extreme as that, one has to step back, rely on perhaps the clarity that one's teacher might have, and one has to step back and see that in fact this is one's own conceptual proliferation. This is merely the chemical stuff. Probably you had your toe caught in the sheet, and that is what made you dream about Amitabha in that way. That certainly is possible, more likely than him coming to you and telling you not to practice. So you have to understand that and take responsibility for that. This is probably an obstacle that is arising within your mind stream, and it has more to do with the position that you slept in or what you had for dinner than it does the message of Amitabha. Students get caught up in that kind of conceptual proliferation. And since there has been a propensity, especially in the New Age kind of thinking that has come around now, for people to listen to the spirit, listen to their own inner guidance, which for the most part nobody has anything against. But when you do that, you must take it with a grain of salt. You must understand that we are walking around day after day not knowing how to find out where to catch the bus. We are walking around day after day deluded about just about everything else. It seems to me unrealistic to think that every piece of information that rises to the surface of your mind is going to be guidance from something, some enlightened source. It seems to me that one has got to take that with the same grain of salt that you take when you read the bus schedule and then read it again to make sure you've got it right. There's not much difference. We all have to understand that not being fully enlightened, there is room for delusion, that within our mind streams is the accumulated non-virtuous and virtuous karma, and we have to be realistic about ourselves. We are sentient beings. Having not yet been born from a lotus, we have to assume that that's true. And assuming that that's true, we have to apply ourselves to the path and accomplish the method. We should begin now to create meritorious activities so that we can safeguard ourselves on the path. Apply the antidote before the problem arises. When people first come to practice here, I tell them, begin now to repeat many repetitions of the 7-line prayer, which is the first prayer in your prayer book. And I give them the context within which to practice that prayer. Is a little puja or sadhana or meditational practice called the shower of blessings. And within that one can repeat the 7-line prayer many times. It is a very meritorious thing to do, and it will stabilize one's mind on the path. And you should do it from now until the time that you are supremely realized. And furthermore, I encourage people to circumambulate the stupa, making wishing prayers for stability on the path and for help. And they should circumambulate the stupa, making wishing prayers to benefit others. That they should make offerings at the altars. That they should help in whatever way. We have many things, many areas here in which people can help in the temple. Anything from cleaning out the bathroom to working on the land across the street, or whatever, vacuuming the floor, whatever it is. These are all meritorious things because they help to support the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And primarily to begin to make wishing prayers that others will be benefited by the virtue of your practice, and sincere wishing prayers to really look around and see that there has been enough suffering and you wish to do all that you can to end it, that this is a meritorious activity. To take teaching, to contemplate on the teachings, to make offerings, to make prayers, to make meditations, to visualize the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, to engage in kindness and generosity. These things are all meritorious activities that we can start on. And then also we can begin to start on the practices that are actually directly given to us by our teachers. And in this case, on this path and in this temple, that would be first the repetition of the 7-line prayer, and then secondarily the engaging in ngundro, or preliminary practice, which many students are practicing here now. So any of you that wish to embark on that should think to do so, and to do so as quickly as possible. Don't wait until an obstacle comes up, because in that obstacle you will experience a certain persuasion or a certain delusion. And why think that you should have to fall away from the path when, if you took the preventative measures ahead of time, you would remain stable throughout your relationship with the path. So begin to apply the antidote immediately. And remember that the key is meritorious activity, those activities which are beneficial to others and which purify the mind stream and cause one to remain very pure in one's intention and very unselfish. That these are the activities that will be mostly of benefit. Nanda.